The morning started like any other in Crestwood Estates, our supposedly idyllic suburban neighborhood. I was enjoying my coffee on the front porch, watching my son wait for the school bus that would arrive any minute. That's when I spotted her, Eleanor Vance, or as everyone in the neighborhood secretly called her, Agnes, the president of our HOA. She was marching down the sidewalk with that familiar look of determination that always spelled trouble. I'd lived in Crestwood Estates for 3 years now, and in that time, Eleanor had cited me for everything from my grass being half an inch too tall to the shade of blue I'd painted my mailbox. According to her, it was cerulean instead of the approved navy blue. Heaven forbid. As the head of the Homeowners Association, she wielded her little laminated badge like it was a police shield, and most neighbors were too tired to fight her endless barrage of violation notices and fines. "Good morning, Eleanor," I called out, keeping my tone deliberately pleasant despite the knot forming in my stomach. My son, Owen, shifted nervously beside me. At 10 years old, he had already learned to dread any interaction with the neighborhood's self-appointed dictator. Eleanor didn't even bother with pleasantries. "I see you're waiting for the school bus again," she said with a disapproving frown, her voice carrying that condescending tone she reserved for what she considered rule breakers. "I've been meaning to talk to you about that." I raised an eyebrow. "About my son going to school? That's generally considered a good thing in most circles, Eleanor." She pursed her lips, clearly not appreciating my subtle sarcasm about the bus entering our neighborhood. "The board has concerns about the noise, the exhaust fumes, and the wear and tear on our private roads. Plus, it's an eyesore. We're discussing a new bylaw at tonight's meeting to prohibit commercial vehicles, including school buses." I nearly choked on my coffee. "You can't be serious. Kids need to get to school, and not everyone can drive them every day. I'm a single dad with a job that starts at 8:30. "That sounds like a personal problem," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Perhaps you should have considered the logistics before moving to a premium neighborhood with standards." Before I could respond, we heard the familiar rumble of the approaching school bus. But instead of staying on the sidewalk where any reasonable person would stand, Eleanor marched directly into the street and planted herself in the middle of the entrance to our cul-de-sac, arms crossed, looking for all the world like a traffic guard who'd lost her mind. The yellow bus slowed as it approached, the driver's confused face visible through the windshield. He gave a polite honk, clearly expecting this obviously deranged woman to move aside. But Eleanor stood her ground, shaking her head vigorously and making a stopping motion with her hand. I immediately rushed over, leaving Owen watching wide-eyed from the sidewalk. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" "You can't block a school bus," I hissed, trying to keep my voice down to avoid creating even more of a scene. She turned to me with the smug smile I'd ever seen on a human face. "Actually, I can. As HOA president, I'm enforcing a preemptive safety measure until the board votes on it tonight. I have every right to protect our neighborhood from unauthorized vehicles." The bus driver had opened his window now. "Ma'am, I need to pick up the children." "Please move aside," he called out, his voice remarkably calm, given the absurdity of the situation. "This is private property," Eleanor shouted back. "You're trespassing with your commercial vehicle. Find another route or pick these children up at the neighborhood entrance." By now, other parents and kids had gathered, watching the standoff with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed amusement. Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street was already recording with her phone. Great, we were about to become the next viral neighborhood dispute, I thought. "Eleanor," I said firmly, stepping closer. "The roads may be maintained by the HOA, but they're still subject to public access laws. You cannot prevent a school bus from performing its duty. What you're doing right now is actually illegal." Her face flushed red. "I know the bylaws better than anyone in this neighborhood. Section 8.3 clearly states that the board has authority over all traffic entering Crestwood Estates." I pulled out my phone. "Then you won't mind if I call the police to sort this out? I'm sure they'd be happy to provide their interpretation of traffic obstruction laws versus HOA bylaws." For a moment, I thought she might back down, but then she lifted her chin defiantly. Go ahead. The city police always side with official neighborhood governance. I've worked with them many times on covenant enforcement. That was it. I dialed 911, maintaining eye contact with Eleanor the entire time. Around us, the crowd had grown, and I could see several parents comforting increasingly anxious children who were worried about being late for school. The bus driver had called his dispatcher, who was presumably contacting his supervisors. This had escalated far beyond a simple morning disagreement. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice came through clearly enough that Eleanor could hear it. I need to report someone illegally blocking a school bus from entering our neighborhood, I said calmly. There are approximately 15 children waiting to be picked up, and our HOA president is physically preventing the bus from accessing our street. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, perhaps finally realizing that this wasn't just a neighborhood squabble anymore. The operator asked for our location, which I provided, along with a description of the situation. Officers are on their way, the operator assured me. Please stay on the line and try to keep the situation from escalating further. I looked at Eleanor. The police are coming. Would you like to reconsider your position before they arrive? This doesn't have to go any further. But Eleanor Vance hadn't become the most feared HOA president in county history by backing down easily. She dug into her purse and pulled out her own phone. I'm calling our HOA attorney right now. He'll explain to these officers that I'm well within my rights. The next 10 minutes were excruciating. The children were getting increasingly restless. Parents were checking their watches and sending emails to employers and schools explaining the delay, and the bus driver was now on his second call with his supervisors. Through it all, Eleanor remained planted in the street, occasionally taking a few steps to block the bus more effectively when the driver attempted to maneuver around her. Finally, a police cruiser turned into our neighborhood, followed by a second one. The crowd parted, and 2 officers approached the scene, taking in the bizarre standoff with professional neutrality that barely masked their confusion. What seems to be the problem here? The first officer asked, looking between me, Eleanor, and the bus driver. Before I could speak, Eleanor launched into her explanation, her voice taking on the honey-sweet tone she reserved for authority figures she wanted to impress. Officer, I'm Eleanor Vance, president of the Crestwood Estates Homeowners Association. I'm simply enforcing our neighborhood policies regarding commercial vehicles on our private roads. This bus hasn't been authorized by the board to enter our community. The officer nodded patiently, then turned to the bus driver, who explained that he'd been driving this route for 4 years without incident until today. Then the officer looked at me. I'll keep it simple, officer. Regardless of any HOA policy, my understanding is that it's illegal to obstruct a school bus. These children need to get to school, and Ms. Vance is physically preventing that from happening. The second officer had been talking to some of the other parents and checking something on the computer in their patrol car. He walked over and conferred quietly with his partner. Then the first officer turned back to Eleanor. Ma'am, I need you to step aside and allow this bus to proceed with its route, he said firmly. Eleanor's face contorted with indignation. Excuse me. I've just explained that as HOA president, Ms. Vance, the officer interrupted, his tone hardening slightly. HOA regulations do not supersede state laws regarding obstruction of educational services or traffic violations. You are currently in violation of Section 4324 of the State Traffic Code, which specifically prohibits the obstruction of school transportation vehicles. The look on Eleanor's face was almost worth the entire ordeal. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. The officer continued, Now, you can step aside voluntarily, or we can discuss this further at the station. Your choice. For a moment, I thought she might actually comply. But then, in a move that left even the most jaded parents gasping, Eleanor took a step closer to the officer and actually poked him in the chest with her finger. Do you know who I am? She demanded, her voice shrill with outrage. I personally approved the landscaping variance for your precinct captain's koi pond last year. One phone call from me, she didn't get to finish that threat. With remarkable restraint, the officer took a step back and said, "Ma'am, please put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for obstruction of an educational service vehicle and for assaulting a police officer." The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. Even I was shocked at how quickly things had escalated. The officer calmly recited Miranda rights as he handcuffed a now sputtering Eleanor, who had gone from imperious to panicked in seconds flat. "This is outrageous," she shrieked as they led her toward the patrol car. "I'll have all your badges. The property values in this neighborhood will plummet without proper covenant enforcement. You'll be hearing from our attorney." With Eleanor secured in the back of the police car, the second officer stayed behind to take statements while the first drove away. The school bus finally entered our neighborhood, the driver apologizing profusely for the delay as children climbed aboard. Owen gave me a quick hug before boarding, whispering, "Dad, that was actually kind of awesome," with a slight grin. The next few days were a whirlwind. Eleanor was released on bail, but the damage was done. The story made local news, complete with cell phone footage from multiple angles thanks to Mrs. Rodriguez and others. The headline, "HOA President Arrested After Blocking School Bus," spread through neighboring communities like wildfire. And soon, regional news picked it up, too. The emergency HOA board meeting that week was the most well-attended in Crestwood Estates' history. Every seat was filled, and people stood along the walls of our community center. Eleanor sat rigidly in the front row, her attorney beside her as the vice president led the meeting. When it came time to vote, the decision to remove her from the board was nearly unanimous, with only her husband and one loyal friend voting in her favor. But the consequences didn't end there. The district attorney decided to pursue charges for both the obstruction and for assaulting an officer. At the preliminary hearing, which I attended out of morbid curiosity, the judge was unsympathetic to Eleanor's claims of just doing her duty. He set a court date and made it clear that if convicted, she was looking at up to 1 year in jail and fines of up to $5,000. The real cherry on top came when I learned that Eleanor worked as a real estate agent specializing in exclusive communities with strong covenant enforcement. After her arrest made the news, her brokerage firm placed her on indefinite leave, citing concerns about alignment with company values. When the verdict finally came, Eleanor was found guilty on both counts. The judge, clearly making an example of her, sentenced her to 30 days in jail, 2 years of probation, a fine of $3,000, and 100 hours of community service, specifically directing school traffic at the local elementary school. As they led her out of the courtroom, Eleanor's face was a mask of shocked disbelief, as though she still couldn't comprehend that her HOA presidency hadn't actually granted her immunity from the laws that governed everyone else. For once, she was completely speechless, the stunned silence in the courtroom a fitting end to her reign of suburban absurdity.